to share what all these massive disruptions mean for passengers and air travel and airlines. We welcome back Mike Boyd, president of the Boyd Group International. Good to see you. You know, I'm a little surprised that we haven't cleared out the delays, but I think that's a short-term issue. The longer-term problem is we keep having these issues, whether it's with Southwest, it's with the airlines, and I know we can't do anything about the weather, but everyone says the same thing, that there needs to be upgrades, and not just one upgrade, like many upgrades across the board. What's your take on what needs to happen?
Well, what happened with Southwest, that was an internal thing to the airline, and they spent a lot of money on IT, but just not on a crew scheduling program, which they're going to be doing. This one is more concerning with the FAA because the FAA is a safety organization, and there's no excuse not to have a backup to this. So again, I think if they're going to be spending $1 billion, they need to start spending it soon, because the Department of Transportation really has egg on its face on this one, especially after criticizing Southwest.
Who's responsible for this? I mean, obviously the FAA, but there's the federal government, and as you probably can imagine, different airports get funding and from different places. Passengers pay. I mean, our ticket prices that we pay, a portion of that goes, I'm sure, to a ton of taxes. I mean, someone is ultimately responsible for this, or at least an agency is.
It's called the Department of Transportation, the Secretary of Transportation. Now, he's been out talking about how he's going to improve things, beating up Southwest, which is fine with me. The bottom line of this, though, is his own department has a problem, and he should be focusing on that. See, if you want to put accountability, it's the guy at the top, Mr. Buttigieg.
What about passengers? For those that are impacted, again, I know weather delays are different, but this, you know, Southwest is going to compensate, I think, some of the Southwest passengers. And in this particular case, passengers can't complain to the Department of Transportation like we can't. We're not going to get compensated by them.
No, and it should be. If the Department of Transportation is going to force Southwest to write checks, and Southwest is doing that kind of voluntarily as well, the Department of Transportation has some culpability for not having the systems in place to manage the air transportation system in the U.S., which you could accuse Southwest of. So again, what's good is goose. What's good?
Right, right. Do you think the DOT and the FAA do you think they know exactly how this issue occurred? And you know, we've been reading a lot about it, but I question it myself. Is like, do they really know exactly what went wrong and how to fix it?
No and no. They don't know exactly what, and they do not know how to fix it. Now, in all fairness, you know, the federal procurement program makes it very difficult for the FAA to do anything. But nevertheless, we do have a system that's involved with safety. We had a safety failure day before yesterday. It's going to get worse if other things are going to happen. But no, they don't know, and that's a staffing issue.
But Mike, if I have to ask you to follow, if you're saying you don't agree with what they're saying right now, what do you think happened?
That's just that we don't know. We have a backup. We have a program that didn't work. Now, they may be making excuses for it, whatever. But whatever they said about a corrupted file or something, that's great. But how did it get corrupted? Why was there not a backup system to it?
All right, let's talk about some good news. American Airlines came out, despite all this craziness that we're talking about. They said growth is going to be in the mid to high teens, which is much more than expected. They've cut down their debt by $7 billion, and they also say their earnings is going to be nearly double what people expected. And of course, we're going to get Delta as well. So it appears that these airlines are clawing their way back from the last couple of years of having a tough time. Ticket prices are high, and I got to ask you, is this the new normal, that these airlines are all just doing great?
Yeah, I think it is the new normal because, again, the airlines are very different than they were 3 years ago before the pandemic. They've cleaned up a lot of overhead. They've got new fleets coming online. So from a whole perspective, the air transportation system has changed. And for the first time I've been in this business 50 years, there are no squirrels in any airline. Our airline industry is run by a lot of very professional people.
But here's my complaint. So I fly quite often, and I'm sure you do too. If the airlines are doing so great, how come our experience, or at least mine in particular, seems to really vary from flight to flight?
Well, I really think you should be quiet, sit in your seat, fasten your seatbelt, and not say anything. That's basically the approach that airlines have had. You'll do business our way. And that has to change. And that's one reason once the Department of Transportation gets involved in consumer issues, that means the airlines have failed. And I'll be honest, from that perspective, the way they've handled passengers has failed, or otherwise we wouldn't have people complaining like this and getting the government involved, which is never a good thing.
Could the airlines do better, though, in terms of dealing with passengers? I mean, specifically, you see a lot of complaints between passengers and the airlines for not just delayed flights, leaving people on the tarmac, and the list goes on. Now, and I'm not saying that the passengers are always right. I would definitely not say that. But you have to agree that the quality of air travel doesn't feel like it's improved at all, at least from the passengers' perspective over the last few years.
No, it hasn't. Look, but one of the reasons is when I started in this racket at LaGuardia, we had 12 people at a ticket counter at American Airlines. Today, there's no tickets, no people at a ticket counter. Everything goes wonderfully, but when something goes south, that little electronic kiosk, it can't help you. And when you get on the phone for 2 hours and have somebody in a distant call center answer, it gets ugly. And that's where they have to look at fixing things, people.
I have been there on the phone, and you just hang up because you get so frustrated, and I know there are lots of people facing that. Always good to have you. I really appreciate the analysis.